From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Bursell. This is The Log. Had a thought, kind of a disturbing thought, as a born and raised Wisconsin boy. I got to look at a chart released by Extinction Rebellion, a group I admire very much. And they compared various kinds of milk. As for their question, which milk is best for the planet? I don't quite understand this chart, but I can see the relative amounts. I don't know the actual amounts. But dairy is on top, and then it's rice, soy, oat, and almond. Those are your choices. In three categories: emissions, land use, and water use. So how much emissions is dairy responsible for? It's more than twice as much as rice. We'll just do this on a comparative basis. Rice is less than half. Soy and oat are even less than that. Almond is no more than a quarter, I'm looking at. Probably more like 20% of emissions. So dairy milk responsible for 5 times the emissions as almond milk and more than twice as much as rice or soy. Land use in square miles, again, just with percentages here, almond, well, all of them are, 5%, 10% at most of land use. So land use, about 20 times the amount of land. Water use, compared to soy and oat, again, about 20 times more. Rice and almond take a lot more water, but still it's only about half of what dairy uses. So dairy just kills it on this chart by wide margins, by great multiples. It produces the most emissions, it requires the most land use and the most water use compared to our options: rice, soy, oat, and almond. And just by this little chart I'm looking at, soy and oat seem to be the least offensive. Rice and almond are both pretty good too, except that for some reason they use a lot of water. Okay. So my thought is, as a Wisconsin guy here, dairy is to Wisconsin as mining is to Virginia. Both industries are dying. Both industries are beloved by the people in their states. It's their identity. So, as most of us are not from Virginia, I'm guessing. I might have some Virginia listeners out there. Hello, Virginia. How are you? Let me tell you, the rest of us in the country look at you guys and think, well, you just got to get over yourselves. And you got to move on to some other industry. Coal is dead. Coal mining has just got to be over. It's got to be part of history. It's got to be in the category of things that go away. Like there was a time when whale blubber was the most the most valued commodity on the globe. Okay, not so much use for whale blubber now. I'm sure people still find uses for it, but you get my point. Coal is just, you have to let it die. You have to go do other things. I'm sorry, it's your identity. Well, I'm having a little more empathy for you today, because people could say the very same thing about dairy in Wisconsin. Nobody on God's good earth needs to drink cow's milk. Nobody needs to do it. It's completely unnecessary, and it uses way too much land and water, and it's responsible for way too much greenhouse gases. So, people of Wisconsin, we don't want to hear this. No, dairy is what we do. It's what makes us special. It's part of our identity. Yeah, at some point, the dairy industry just has to fall away, just like coal has to fall away, just like whale blubber fell away. So, anyway, these are the kinds of things I think about. I was curious about something, so I looked it up. According to the Pew Research Center, we're talking radio and podcasting now, by the way, in case you couldn't read my mind. The best segue is you reading my mind. Well, I'll tell you why I was thinking about it, because I just, I know I gush all the time about my community radio station, the Log's home station, WXRW River West Radio, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. riverwestradio.com. It's just the greatest radio station in the world. It's so wonderful to have a community radio station. I cannot begin to tell you. The other day, as with most days really, I'm always kind of, I've got different media happening. I'm scrolling through articles on my phone. I've got something going on. I've got NPR on the radio, or I'm checking out the cable guys to see what the latest news is. I've got all this sort of news and information coming into my head. But what I also have is I have a radio, an old-fashioned radio like your grandmother has, okay? And I have it in my kitchen. And every time I walk into my kitchen, it's just a habit. The very first thing I do is I hit the on button on my old-fashioned radio. And that radio is always tuned to WXRW. And so I never know what I'm going to hear. Sometimes I'm surprised I hear myself, because of course this program airs on that station. But I never know what I'm going to hear, and I'm always just absolutely delighted. Because River West Radio is one of the last stations in the country, there just aren't that many anymore, that still has what you might call patchwork programming. Martin, our wonderful program manager, he puts a lot of thought into the schedule, of course, and so different shows relate to each other. But the point is, it's every half hour, it's something new. It's somebody talking about movies, and then it's somebody talking about the news, and then it's somebody talking about religion, and then it's somebody's talking about the rights of incarcerated people, and then it's somebody talking about the African diaspora. I mean, it's these great voices, and every half hour it's something different, and it's always interesting, and it's always fun. And then, another half hour, it's a couple people who are just goofing off, and they're like being really hilarious doing it. And they're all from the community. And to go from my usual media intake that I'm kind of bombarded with, and I do it to myself. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm the one turning on all this stuff. And I'm hearing all these voices and all the, and when I go into the kitchen, which we all do several times a day, to get a glass of water or to get a snack or to prepare a meal, we spend lots of time in our kitchen. If we're normal people, I think, right? Don't we? You spend time in your kitchen, right? You go in, open the fridge door, look at it for a minute, and then walk out. But every time I go in, I turn on WXRW, and it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like just another reminder every single time of what's really valuable. What's so valuable to discuss and to listen to and to share. Real voices of real people discussing their passions, because that's what these volunteer producers do. If they're going to put the time and effort into producing a weekly program, or sometimes a bi-weekly or a daily or whatever it is, and to share this information with the wider community, you got to know that they're passionate about whatever it is they're sharing. And it's all over the map. It's a wonderful little prize nugget. Every time I walk into that kitchen, I'm going to hear something new and unexpected. And valuable. That's the thing. That's the key thing. It's valuable. It's enriching. It's entertaining. And it's fresh and it's real and it's sincere. It's authentic. It is just it's just worlds apart from the rest of the media you'll consume. Now, there's lots of good stuff out there, and a lot of it is very valuable. I'm not dismissing that. Yeah, you got to get the news. You got to get an analysis of the news. There's important stuff to be learned and to know, and that's fine. I understand all that. I'm not discounting that. But what I am telling you is you gotta do this. If you are in range, and you are because it's online, riverwestradio.com. Now, this isn't necessarily a plug for them, although I'll plug them anytime you ask. It's a plug for community media, and especially community radio. Go to your local thrift store and buy a couple of old-fashioned radios like your grandma has. Tune it to your community radio station and put that thing in your kitchen. Or maybe in your bathroom. That might be a good place for it too. Every time you hit the bathroom, first thing you do is hit the on button on your grandma's radio. Community radio, man, it's the greatest thing in the world. Now, my experience is a little unusual because only a handful, you can count them on one or two hands, of community radio stations are talk-based. The others are almost entirely music. And that's fine too. But the kind of experience I'm sharing here, that sort of wonderful moment when I discover something that I didn't know I needed from my neighbors. It's just so beautiful. So it's kind of rare. There aren't that many community radio stations that are talk-based. So find it. Find it in your community. And if you can't, go online. You can start with us, riverwestradio.com. Goes around the world, of course. It's always live streaming. And as I've said before, if you don't have a community radio station, start one. It's just the greatest thing in the world. Well, I was curious about listenership because I was wondering about this whole radio thing. Because I know people, especially young people, who literally don't own a radio. But all through from when radios became common in the, mid-30s, I guess? By 1940, everybody had one. And virtually everybody has had a radio in their home ever since, except a very slight decline here in the last few years. And right now it's down to 83%, down from 90 plus. So the point is that's still an awful lot of damn people. And that's what I was curious about. How many people still listen to the radio? Well, it turns out that radio still kills it. Radio outrates every other medium. Listening online, listening to podcasts, listening on your phone. Old-fashioned terrestrial radio still leads the pack by a mile. Of course, the podcasts are up, and up. And if you can find something you really like, I tell you, I go fishing for podcasts I like all the time, and I'm almost always disappointed. And I'll tell you, I think the main reason that I'm always disappointed in podcasts is because they're so derivative of each other. There's only a couple of formats, a couple of genres, and they all copy each other. I'm always on the search for good radio theater. It's hard. Oh man, it's hard to find. Or some experimental soundscape kind of stuff. Boy, it's out there, but it's buried deep. And I love, here, I'll give you one podcast recommendation. It's called The Subtle Forces. The Subtle Forces. Also another podcast that counts River West Radio as its terrestrial home. So we share that distinction together. Written, produced, and hosted by a wonderful performance artist, Anja, not Anja. She and I go back a few years. We've done some projects together. And she has, it's just right down my alley. I love her half hour every week. It's commentary and poetry and conversation and great original music, and it's just put together in this beautiful, slightly chaotic, slightly absurd, wonderfully seamless kind of way. It's just, it's very creative in its presentation as well as its content. I mean, you hear podcasts now where they incorporate backing music or sound effects into the commentary, and those of us who were experimenting in radio 30 years ago were doing that. We hear it now, we're just like, okay, what else you got? Not to brag, but there were people at the forefront of that. And it was literally like, I started doing this in the early 80s. And we didn't really hear anything like that until much, much later. When did This American Life start? Early mid-90s? And they just barely scratched the surface of that. And now you'll hear some podcasts that are really trying to incorporate sound effects and music, intertwining with the spoken word in an interesting way. But there again, that's, for some of us, my buddy Frank Skillman out in San Francisco, that's what we were doing 30, 40 years ago. It's like, what else you got? Come on. I'm always on the search for something new, something creative, something interesting. And once again, The Subtle Forces. Look for that on your favorite podcast platform. And It's a little bit reminiscent of the aforementioned Frank Skillman and I did something called Neo Radio many years ago. And it's just a really nice mix of audio content and spoken word. And then the spoken word itself, the actual words themselves. Let's not diminish the importance of that. Anja, not Anja, is a really very sensitive and intelligent, creative, and quirky and funny at times too, artist. So I just love Anja, and there's a recommendation for you. And again, I invite you to send me your recommendations. I'm dying to find a good podcast that I can really get into. I've got one. I've got The Subtle Forces, and I'll keep looking. And, everybody's doing their best. I'm not going to be a big critic here. But just from my ear, and this is just a personal opinion, it either sounds like it's just way too professional. It's just, what I'd hear on NPR. It's no different. It's not interesting. It's just, okay, yeah, this is good. Like the New York Times has a daily podcast. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. But it's just a couple guys talking about a particular story, and there's nothing innovative about it or anything. And I listen occasionally. Oh, okay. And then there's the people who try to be funny and they're not. And there's a huge, one of the big genres of podcasting I find a little weird. And that is that every comedian has a podcast. It's like a requirement now. If you're a stand-up, you have to have a podcast. And I've listened to many of them. And if you're not familiar with this format, let me tell you one thing right off the bat. They are never funny. That's the weird thing. They're comedians, so you think they're stand-up comedians. And they have a podcast, so you would think it would be funny. But they're not. They're just some person talking about, the world, talking about the news, talking about their life. And they get somebody in there with them, some other stand-up, and they kind of yuck it up and yak back and forth. But it's almost never funny. They might get lucky once or twice in a 45-minute podcast and actually say something funny. But when you think about it for a minute, well, of course they're not funny. It's work to be funny. If you know me at all, if you've listened to this show at all, you know that I love comedy. And I have such huge respect for it. And I know from both sides of the stage, because I've been on stage doing comedic things. I've never been a stand-up. I've never even attempted it because it's just too hard. I've got friends who do it. And I feel like as a comedy nerd, I sort of understand what it takes. And it's damned hard to get 7-8 minutes of a funny set, let alone a whole hour to do a special. So if you're going to do a 45-minute podcast, you think it's going to be funny? No, that takes a year or two. It would literally take 2 years to come up with 45 funny minutes for a podcast where you're getting a laugh every few seconds, right? I forget what the rate is, but there's a standard. Comics, stand-ups want a laugh it's like once every 30 seconds or 20 seconds or something like that. I forget. Anyway, that's my point. If you tune into to a comedian's podcast, it's not going to be funny. And there's a very good reason for that. It's too hard to be funny. It's hard work. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to mention this kind of radio news. Radio is not dead. Radio has been declared dead many, many times over the years. And nope, it's still going very strong. And I highly recommend that you get yourself a grandma radio, tune it to your local community radio station, and every time you visit the kitchen and or your bathroom, hit that one button. You don't have to click on anything. You don't have to scroll. You don't have to go hit any menus. You don't have to subscribe. You don't have to do a damn thing except hit one button. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. Community radio. Find your local one. If you don't have one, start one. Hey, have you seen this? I'll bet you have. It's a very popular thing to share in social media. 9 tips for taking care of your husband, taken from a 1950s home economics book. Have you seen this? Yeah, it's been making the rounds for years. Okay, so here's the list. Number 1, have dinner ready. Plan ahead, even the night before, to have a delicious meal on time. This is a way of letting him know that you have been thinking about him and are concerned about his needs. Most men are hungry when they come home, and the prospect of a good meal are part of the warm welcome needed. I'm not going to bury my lead. I'm going to tell you right now why I'm telling you this. I think this is wonderful. Every one of these pieces of advice is fantastic. All you have to do is remove the gender roles. All of this is 100% translatable to contemporary families because it's just about caring for each other. It's about being nice to each other, kind, helpful. Show them you love them. So the next time you see this article or this meme or, however it's posted in your social media, and your first instinct is just to laugh at it and go, or to be enraged by it. Oh, look at this horrible exploitation of women and their oppression. Yeah, of course I agree with you. Of course I do. But what I'm telling you is look at the 9 tips. And every one of them is beautiful. You just take out the gender roles. This is the stuff we ought to be doing for each other. Number 2, prepare yourself. Take 15 minutes to rest so you will be refreshed when he arrives. Touch up your makeup. Put a ribbon in your hair and be fresh looking. He has just been he has just been with a lot of work-weary people. Be a little gay and a little more interesting. His boring day may need a lift. Okay, all right, it sounds ridiculous. But this is the greatest advice ever. If you're the one who happens to be at home, if you're lucky enough to have those situations where you get some time at home, yeah. Now, let me not bury my second lead. All of this is wonderful advice, but it only really works if someone in the family can be home part of the time. If both people are working full-time hours, this gets pretty difficult. So this is, as usual, just another critique of capitalism, which expects every adult to work full-time. That's exploitation. It was never designed to be that way. From the very earliest stirrings of humans on Earth, we tended to the domestic side of things. We made clothes, we sewed them, we cleaned them, we grew food, we prepared food, we served it, we ate it. We had a domestic life. Somebody took care of these things for always, as long as there have been humans on this planet. It's only been the last blink of an eye where nobody can do this unless you're rich, unless you're part of the 1% who can afford it. So I have 2 big points to make here. 1, capitalism sucks, and we should all be able to take care of each other in a domestic way. And 2, this is all great advice. All you have to do is take the gender out of it. These are the things we should be doing for each other. I love this list. Number 3, clear away the clutter. Make one last trip through the main part of the house just before your husband arrives, gathering up school books, toys, paper, etc. Then run a dust cloth over the tables. Your husband will feel he has reached a haven of rest and order, and it will give you a lift too. I love this list. These are the kinds of things we should be doing for each other and for ourselves in our homes. We can't because capitalism sucks and it's got us all by the short hairs. And we resist because we associate this with arcane gender roles. But when we defeat capitalism, and we will, at some point we will, and every kind of family, however you describe your family, whatever your genders or non-genders, this is beautiful advice. Number 4, prepare the children if you have children. Take a few minutes to wash the children's hands and faces, if they're small. Comb their hair, and if necessary, change their clothes. They are little treasures, and he would like to see them playing the part. Minimize all noise. You might laugh at this, but listen. At the time of his arrival, eliminate all noise of washer, dryer, dishwasher, or vacuum. Try to encourage the children to be quiet. Be happy to see him. Greet him with a warm smile, and be glad to see him. See, and this is why I'm talking about this, because I know everybody wants to mock this list. I know why it's being published. but read it with a different point of view. This is beautiful. This is how we all should be treating each other. And whoever happens to be home when the other comes home, this is great advice. Number 6, some don'ts. Don't greet him with problems or complaints. Don't complain if he's late for dinner. Count this as minor compared with what he might have gone through that day. Again, this is fantastic advice. Everybody be just considerate of each other's feelings. Now, I will give you this much, okay? There needs to be another list, side by side, advice for the person coming home. Okay? And this one especially made me think of this. The person coming home needs to be aware that the person who's been home may have some issues too to deal with. Everybody has to be kind to each other. This is not a one-way street, okay? It's not just the home person serving the one coming in from the cold, hard world. That's just what this particular list is about. We'll have to make up another list for the person who's been out in the cold, hard world, okay? We'll have to find it. If we can't find it, we'll have to make one up of our own. Okay, a couple more. Make him comfortable. Have him lean back in a comfortable chair or suggest he lie down in the bedroom. Have a cool or warm drink ready for him. Arrange his pillow and offer to take off his shoes. Speak in a low, soft, soothing, and pleasant voice. Allow him to relax and unwind. I know it sounds goofy, but I think this is beautiful. This is how we should all treat each other. And finally, number 8, listen. You may have a lot of things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. See, I agree with this. Again, take gender out of it. The person coming home really shouldn't be bombarded with stuff right away. We've all been there. We've all been in the position of coming home after a hard day's work. You want to start hearing an earful of problems right away? No, this is great advice. And finally, number 9, make the evening his. Well, this sounds bad. Let's see what this says. Never complain if he does not take you out to dinner or to other places of entertainment. Instead, try to understand his world of strain and pressure, his need to come home and relax. All right, I don't like this one as much, but I get it. That is a problem with couples. I've been coupled up a few times in my life. And I'm typically the one who doesn't need to or want to go out as much as my partner in the times in my life when I've been coupled. It's not that I don't want to go out. I think I was like this is past tense. Maybe it is. I think I'm a relatively normal person. I'm a bit of an introvert. I kind of like to stay in, but I'm fine going out. I'm fine going to a party or going to a movie or going out to dinner. Typically, though, in relationships, I was the one who needed it and wanted it less. My partner typically wanted it or needed it more. That's just something like everything else you got to work out. And finally, the goal, try to make your home a place of peace and order where your husband can renew himself in body and spirit. There again, just take away the gender. Try to make your home a place of peace and order where your partner can renew themselves in body and spirit. I think this is a beautiful list. And the next time you see it, I want you to read it with all this in mind. Yes, of course, when you put in the 1950s gender expectations, it's kind of horrific, it's kind of horrible. But when you remove those and you just look at the qualities embedded in this advice, it's beautiful. And I think we should all treat each other with care and respect. We should take care of each other. And the whole idea of having a domestic life, that's been stolen from us. Damn the capitalists. They stole our domestic lives, at least from many of us, most of us. Poor schlubs who work 40, 50 hours a week. And if it's a couple, make that 80 to 100 hours a week. It's just not right. So, number 1, damn the capitalists. Number 2, when we defeat them, and we will, let's resurrect this sort of beautiful domesticity with the gender expectations tossed out the window. All right. There you go, my people. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.